Hi, it's Mel. It is January 8th and I've finished 5 books so far in January. So it is time to do another vlog style monthly reading wrap up. These are videos that I do every month where I talk about the books that I've read throughout the month as close to when I've read them as I can. I try to talk for only about 5 minutes for each book. Try to tell you something about the book and what I thought of it. I have been thinking about doing these wrap-ups differently, so definitely leave any suggestions you have in the comments below. I feel like these videos get super long and they're hard for me to remember to do them in a timely manner, so sometimes the books that I've read go for longer without me explaining them. Would it make more sense for me to do a mid-month wrap-up which would come out like at the end of the month, and then a full month wrap-up where I just hold up the books that I already talked about but then talk about the second half of the month? Would it make sense for me to do weekly wrap-ups but then they'd be behind? I don't know. I do like these vlog style reading wrap-ups, don't get me wrong, but they get really long. Like sometimes they're over an hour. I try to make them under an hour if I can, but maybe you love videos talking about books. Maybe you love to just put me on in the background and listen to what I have to say. Maybe you don't do that at all. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below if you have any ideas. The first book that I finished in January was The Marriage of Heaven and Hell by William Blake. This is a very cute little Dover edition that I have, and it's cool because it has the original pictures and writing of this William Blake essay, story, I don't know what you want to call it, but then it also has all the writing in the back as text to make it easy to read. Now, I read this on January 2nd, I believe. I hadn't finished a book in a while and I felt like I needed to finish a book to start the beginning of the year, so I wanted something short, but I've also been wanting to read this one for so long, and I keep putting it on TBRs and I keep taking it off and I keep putting it in piles of books that I'm going to read and then not reading it, so I decided it was time to read it. This is a weird little book. William Blake was, by all accounts, a weird guy. This is kind of a, not instructional, but like kind of a way of thinking or being or acting with instructional aspects. So like, what are those called? Like proverbs? They're kind of like proverbs. They are called proverbs sometimes in this text, but they are proverbs of hell. As I understand proverbs, they are short sentences or very short collections of sentences that teach you something about the world, give you a better understanding for how to live. So like, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, which is a funny sentence that we don't really use, but the proverb is the idea that obviously it's better to have your own bird than to have 2 out in the wild, which again, I don't fully agree with. I guess it depends on what you're going to do with the bird. Or a stitch in time saves 9, whatever that means. Those type of things, but these are like from hell, so I guess this is kind of like the idea that heaven and hell are not what people think they are based on Catholicism or Christianity. That hell is not necessarily bad, that hell is not necessarily a bad place, and the things that are considered hellish or demonic or bad are not necessarily bad. I think Blake was very interested in the idea of morality and how religion wasn't always the actual compass to morality that it claimed to be, and that many people who were religious were amoral, and many people who were considered amoral or who were considered bad people because they were not religious actually had more morals than the religious people. So it was really interesting. I don't know if I fully like got it, and I don't know if it's something that you can fully get. Obviously I did a little bit of research on William Blake and I have watched a couple of videos on William Blake. There's a good one. It might actually be about this book. I should watch it again, from one of my all-time favorite YouTubers, which is Great Art Explained. Great Art Explained is a fantastic YouTube channel, and it does have great books explained as well. If you want to learn more about art in general, that's a fantastic channel to watch. I'm glad that I read this. I thought it was interesting. Blake created his own way of engraving and illuminating text, which was really interesting, so it was neat to see the color pictures of that. I definitely would like to read more of his work. I'd like to read some of his poetry because I imagine that it's very interesting. bizarre, interesting. He was a big proponent of like free love, like pre-60s in the 1800s kind of free love. Yeah, he was an interesting guy, and this was an interesting story. I'm glad to have read it. I will be keeping it on my shelves, maybe revisiting it at some point, but like I said, I don't think I really got it. The next book is very similar, actually. This is The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam of Naishapur, and this was translated and retold by Edward Fitzgerald. This is a collection of ancient poetry from Persia, as it was called then, modern day Iran. Edward Fitzgerald, like I said, retold this and translated this, but it is originally ascribed to Omar Khayyam. This was illustrated by Charles Stewart, and it has these really beautiful illustrations. And this is a collection of short stanzas. I guess that's what a rubaiyat is, a short stanza poem. So this is ancient poetry, and it is similar to The Marriage of Heaven and Hell by William Blake, because these are all kind of parables or proverbs or short stories to live by, to demonstrate correct ways of doing things and correct ways of living, or demonstrate the opposite of correct ways of living so that you know what you're not supposed to be doing. And some of these you've definitely heard of. The one that struck me specifically was The Moving Finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. So that makes me think of Agatha Christie, because she used that quote and that poem in her Miss Marple story, The Moving Finger. But there's a couple of other ones too that you would recognize from just general literature and literacy and life. And again, similar to Marriage of Heaven and Hell, these poems aren't necessarily instructional in the way that you should just follow the crowds, that you should just follow religion, that you should just follow the common way of doing things. They're more about individuality and doing things because they're morally right. There are definitely heroes and villains in some of these stories, you know, people who are thieves or drinkers or things like that, that show their downfall as opposed to just preaching why they're bad. It's more like, here's an example of like what happens. So interesting stuff. Again, I don't think I really got it. I will definitely be keeping this edition, and I will definitely be rereading it, probably dipping in and out of it. It's very short. It's only like 35 pages. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell was only like 48 pages, including all the pictures, of course, for both. I'm glad to have read it. There's also, I guess, some dispute over Edward Fitzgerald and if he really took all these from Omar Khayyam, or if Omar Khayyam actually wrote all the poems, or if they were like a collection of Iranian work in general, and then Edward just connected them to this author. But then there's also kind of a back and forth that maybe he did write them all. So there's like an interesting history there. This is one of those books that I've read recently that make me realize, similar to China in 10 Words and the autobiography of a sexually emancipated woman, I don't really understand the history here. Like, I don't understand the context of the time of these writings, and I don't understand the connection of the time with Edward Fitzgerald's time, because these are written in like the 1100s or something, and then adapted them much, much later in like the 1800s. So it made me wonder like what was going on in the world at those different times and why the 1800s were looking back to those times. But I think ancient poetry is a really interesting thing to dive into and to learn more about. The next book that I finished in January was Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. This is a reread for me. I've been meaning to reread this one for a while. I have not read any Kurt Vonnegut in many years. I don't think I've read any since starting my channel, so at least 5 years, but probably more than that. But I've read quite a bit of Kurt Vonnegut in my life. I would definitely count him as one of my favorite authors, and this book just reminded me why. It is so amazing and incredible, and it's even better better than I remembered it in a lot of ways, because like I forgot that it was so self-insert by the author, even though this is or contains semi-self-autobiographical elements, it also contains self-insert by Kurt Vonnegut. So he actually is in this story and sometimes calls himself out in the story, as well as the main character kind of being Kurt Vonnegut as well. Kurt Vonnegut's actually also in this story. So it's very interesting. This story follows Billy Pilgrim, who has come unstuck in time. So he gets to relive different moments of his life. He gets to go back and forth in time. Well, gets to, has to, is forced to. I don't think he always wants to do that. This causes him to be in a ever fluctuating present, past, future time where he is reliving his time in the Second World War, and specifically of the bombing of Dresden. So he's constantly having to relive all of that, but he, at the same time, sometimes he's in bed with his wife, sometimes he's in the hospital after an accident, sometimes he's at his daughter's wedding. So it's like time moves in all different directions, and almost at all times simultaneously. So this book is about his time in the war, and that's the time period that we see the most of. And basically from when he got to the war to the bombing of Dresden, which was really only a couple of weeks, I think, for him, or maybe a couple of months at the most. And what a horrible thing war is and how horrendous it is. It's always a great time to read this. It's always a great time to read anti-war books, but it's another good anti-war book to read at a time when we're at war with so many places, and we're helping fund wars in so many places, and we're getting involved in things that we shouldn't necessarily be getting involved in. It's very anti-war, it's very pro-peace, so it's a good thing for now. But I forgot that this is all vignettes, which makes sense because Billy Pilgrim is traveling throughout time. So each little section sometimes is a different timeline, each little area gets fragmented, and this book is extremely fragmented, and his story is extremely fragmented, but it's so easy to understand. It's so easy to connect all the portions together. It's so easy to remember what's happening in each timeline. And it is very short. It's just over 200 pages in this edition. It does have a sci-fi element as well, and it really leaves you with a lot of questions about Billy Pilgrim, questions about his experiences, but also questions about mental health, obviously the trauma of war and PTSD. So it was really great. I'm so happy I reread it, and I definitely do plan on rereading more Kurt Vonnegut and maybe trying to get to some of the books that I haven't read yet. The next book that I finished in January was Sandwich by Catherine Newman. This is about a family told from the perspective of the mother who are going on vacation to Cape Cod. They live around that area in Massachusetts, in Connecticut or something like that, and they go every year to the same rental house on Cape Cod, and the mother now is in her 50s. She's experiencing menopause, and this is almost entirely inner dialogue about her feelings about her own life, her feelings about her kids now that they're grown, they're like 20 and 25, her feelings about her husband, her feelings about her life, her feelings about everything that goes on, her parents, their friends, and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting that I read this now because I just read 2 other books about much younger women going through a similar thing where they're in a new place, either in rental homes, which was Rental House by Y.K. Wang, or looking for new apartments, which was The Anthropologists. And this is very sweet and quirky and honest, plain, simple language, and told in a very ready for TV kind of way, which I think people want. It's obviously very short, it's very punchy, and it's told by the days of the week that they're at this place. And it really has something for everyone because it's so much about familial relationships and about feeling isolated in those relationships, but it's very light, it's very fun, even though it has hard topics, even though it deals with queerness, even though it deals with loss of family members, even though it deals with your pets getting older, all those things. I think at the heart of this, there's something for everyone to identify with, and I think that's why it's been so popular. At first I didn't want to read this because I thought it was just another kind of white privileged family, which it is, but I think it's really talked about in this too. I think it's made plain that they understand and accept their privilege in a lot of ways and like think about it. So it's a very thoughtful book in a lot of ways too, even though it is very simple and very simplified. In some ways it was very comforting because it's like, oh yes, I have those struggles. I have those struggles with my body and my appearance and my age and feeling younger than I am. I have those struggles with familial relationships. I have those struggles with marital relationships. I have those struggles with friendship relationships. And on the other side of the struggles, I have those benefits of all those things too, and the benefits that come with those things. So it's like very comforting that it's so relatable, and comforting if you have gone through the exact traumas that she has, or comforting if you have not gone through those things. But also it kind of was like, I don't know, it's that balance of, oh, I'm not unique. Oh, I'm not special and singular, because we all share the same things. Like each person's thoughts are unique, and each person has unique attributes to themselves, and their experiences that are universal create a person who is unique. But like anything that you've gone through, someone else has already gone through. Any thought that you've had, someone else has already had. The fact that you are thinking them makes you unique, but like the thought itself is not unique. The struggle itself is not unique. The joy itself is not unique. And so in some ways it's very comforting and very nice and a reminder of that. But in other ways you're like, oh yeah, I'm nothing new. I'm nothing special. I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. It's a very short audiobook, only like 4 hours long. I think it's worth it, but I mean, it does come from a white privileged family perspective for sure. In context, it's good to remember that, even though it is mentioned, even though it is recognized within the book. I don't always want to read about that. Probably will read the sequel as well, because they're so short, and I did like being with our main character, Rocky, and I did like her family and seeing what happened to them, the mundane things and the more interesting or more catastrophic things, both good and bad, that happened to them. Yeah, again, I think it's interesting to have read this so close to Rendell House and The Anthropologist, so they might all be talking to each other. I do like reading from an older perspective, especially now that I'm so old. That part was fun, and I probably will move on with the series. I won't be keeping these books though. I'll definitely be passing them along at the end of the year. I will not be reading the sequel to this anytime soon because I'm doing the Read What You Own challenge, and I have a lot of books that I gotta read before I can buy new books, so I can't be reading too many things on audio that I don't own physically. The next book that I finished in January was Widow Basquiat, a love story by Jennifer Clement. This is a nonfiction told in kind of a unique way, where it's told in all these little vignettes and stories of Suzanne Malik, who was Basquiat's girlfriend, on again, off again girlfriend and friend for a very long time. Suzanne was a woman who was of mixed race descent, I think Pakistani Canadian descent, who ended up leaving her family in Canada and moving to New York City to make her way, like in New York City, stumbled upon the art scene, stumbled upon Jean-Michel Basquiat, became ingrained in all that stuff that was going on at that time in New York. Basquiat and Suzanne definitely were truly in love, and she was there on again, off again, like I said, as his girlfriend, as his friend, throughout his early days as an artist, when he was first getting recognition, and then all the way up to his death. They sometimes saw each other, sometimes didn't. It's told by Jennifer Clement, who was best friends with Suzanne, and also on that scene. It's definitely told in a very fictional or fictionalized sort of way, where there's long passage, well, not long passages, they're short passages, but there's part of each little vignette-y story or chapter is Jennifer writing, not as Suzanne, but like almost as she was there. Like it uses third person talking about Suzanne, not first person as in Suzanne talking about herself, but it's very poetic, it's very purple prose, it's very stylized, like the way that it's written. And then usually at the end, there's some words in italic that are actually interviews with Suzanne. So it's Suzanne talking in first person. Sometimes those go on for a long time. Suzanne relating something about what Jennifer has just written or relating something else. Sometimes it's a little bit of what Jennifer wrote and then a lot of the interview with Suzanne. Sometimes the chapters are headed with paintings by Jean-Michel Basquiat and descriptions of that painting and how it fit into Suzanne's life at the time. Like what was happening around the time that this painting was made and what this painting might symbolize. Suzanne talking about that painting or talking about that incident that made it into a painting. So it was really, really short, very quick to get through. You could definitely read this all in one day if you wanted to sit down and read it. I read it like over 2 days. I really liked it. I think it is definitely helpful to have some knowledge of Jean-Michel Basquiat's life and of the art scene in New York at that time because there's a lot of name dropping. I did still have to look up a lot of people because the way that Jennifer and Suzanne write about these people is as if you know them. So there were some designers, fashion designers, and artists that I wasn't familiar with that I had to look up. And sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I just read it in context and it was fine. But it definitely gives you a whole list of names and a whole list of people, a whole list of artists, musical, painters, media, all different things that you could look up if you were more interested in this time. And it paints an interesting picture of Jean-Michel because, you know, he wasn't a wholly likable person and he was on drugs for the vast majority of his life and he was not necessarily nice to everyone, even the people that he loved as dearly as he loved Suzanne. So it was really great. I loved it. I read a biography of Jean-Michel a few years ago and I thought it was pretty poorly written and not very good, but I would love to read another one. I can't remember who that was by, but like this was just such an interesting way to write a biography, to write a memoir. Can it be a memoir if it's not you? I just realized the other day that memoir like means memory and a memoir is your memories of something. So in a way, this is a memoir of Jennifer as well because she was there for a lot of it. And she does come into this biography as a character as well as being the author. Yeah, it was really great. If you're interested in this time period, if you're interested in art in New York at any time period, if you're interested in any of this artwork, I would definitely suggest picking it up. And those were the first 5 books that I read in January of 2026. That's so crazy. And when I read some more, I'll let you know. All right, it is Thursday, January 22nd, and I've read quite a few more books in January. The next book that I finished in January was Erasure by Percival Everett, or Eraser by Percival Everett. This is about a writer who writes like really academic, really archaic, really unfathomable and like ununderstandable books and about his family. So he has a brother and sister who are both doctors. One works in an abortion clinic and like a low income clinic. One works as a, what is that called? Plastic surgeon and lives in Arizona. Our main character, whose name is Thelonious, and he's called Monk, lives in California. His mom and his sister live in DC. So in the beginning of this book, we see him taking the opportunity to talk on a panel so that he can get a free visit to DC. His trip is paid for, even though he's like extremely unpopular in literary circles. He goes to be able to visit his mom and sister. So we meet them and we kind of learn about his standing in the literary world, that like people like him, but he's so pretentious and his writing is so indecipherable that they don't really take him that seriously, and he feels very much like pretentious about his writing. Like he thinks that only academic or literary writing is like worth anything, and he doesn't appreciate like modern popular novels. So he talks specifically about one woman who has written a very cliche, stereotypical, in some people's minds, view of Black life in America. And he doesn't really understand this because he grew up like fairly well off. His father was a doctor and they were very popular in the society that they lived in the community that they lived in. They were well off. It has echoes of like an autobiography of an ex-colored man, in that like he doesn't think of himself as Black. He doesn't think about the world in that way because he's had the privilege that he hasn't had to think of the world in that way to a certain extent. And because he's like projecting that image, like he doesn't want to have to think of the world from that black lens and as a divided community of black and white. So he like kind of projects that into the company that he keeps and the writing that he does and his thoughts on people who pander to and talk down to the black experience is basically what he's saying. A bunch of things happen and it turns out that he has to move back to DC and needs money. In a moment of not desperation, but like exasperation, he decides to write like a scathing, farcical version of life in the inner city, black life. Someone living in the model that's portrayed by other people of the ghetto. Not that it's entirely untrue, he's not even saying that, but he's doing it in such a way. He doesn't believe his own writing and he's definitely like poking fun at people who think that that's the only way that black people live. So this is a book within a book, which I didn't realize. So the whole book that he writes is in Eraser. And to be honest, I skipped around a little bit of that part. It is difficult to read because it's written to be difficult to read. It's written to be ridiculous. It's written to be a stereotype and racist. It was a little bit hard to get through. It is like an eighth of the book, a quarter of the book, almost. I mean, I got the gist. I read most of it and I skipped around a little bit. And then, of course, that book takes off. And that's the story we all know. And this book was turned into the movie American Fiction. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more about his family and his family dynamics and how he fits in or doesn't fit in with his family, as well as how he doesn't fit in the literary world, as well as how he doesn't fit in with the dating scene. I guess I thought it was going to be more about the literary world, and in a lot of ways it's really more about him and his experience, what that experience is compared to the one that he sees as stereotypical. But then there's also like a whole meta part of this book that I wasn't expecting. Like not only meta to the character, but like meta to reading this book, and especially as like a white reader. So it just really is so thought-provoking and interesting. It's definitely one that I will reread. It's definitely one that makes you wonder about other books that you've read and about how much Percival Everett is poking fun at literary giants, how much he's poking fun at literary readers, how much he is believing his main character and agreeing with his main character or making fun of his main character. Like, it was really good. I mean, people say that it's really good, but it was really, really good. And it was so topical in a lot of ways. It was written quite a while ago. It was published in 2001, which is crazy because it feels very, very current. There isn't exactly talk of the current political climate, but there is foreshadowing for it. If you had told me this book was written in 2010, I would have believed you. If you told me this book was written in 2019, I would have believed you. If you told me this book was written in 2023, I would have believed you. So the only reason that I know it wasn't written this year was because I know it wasn't written this year. His writing was absolutely incredible, and I just closed the book with my mind blown and wondering what I missed, but not that I skipped something or that I missed something, but like how he sculpted the story to do what it did without you like seeing the puppet strings, you know? It was incredible. It was really, really good. And I can't wait to read more of his writing. I can't wait to read more of his books. I can't wait to see what he does with more current topics, a contemporary story closer to our own age, or with something like James that is super, super topical, but historical fiction. Wow, amazing. The next book that I finished in January was The Gardner Heist, the true story of the world's largest unsolved art theft. Now, even though this says it's the story of the largest unsolved art theft, I read this book thinking that we were going to get some resolution in the end. This is by Ulrich Boser, and this tells the story of the Gardner Heist, which is a very famous and unsolved case of someone robbing a museum in Boston. Now, this museum was not well guarded. This museum was not well reinforced against theft, But the way that it happened and that no one was caught and that the art has never been found boggles the mind, because people have been working on it, people have been thinking about it, people have been following leads, people have been writing stories, people have been using different techniques to try to solve this case, and no one ever has. And the most confusing and confounding part of it is that the art has never even resurfaced at all. So maybe they wouldn't even solve the case, but at least some of the artwork, irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind artwork, would have been seen. And more than it not being seen and more than the case not being solved is the constant like push and pull, or one step forward, two steps back, that people attached to this case have gone through, and how people attached to this case have become completely obsessed with it, feel the need to continue to try to solve this case many, many years after it has continued to be unresolved. It's incredible how many times in this story the author spoke to someone who said that they had a lead and that lead went nowhere, how someone said that they heard someone who had seen the paintings and then that person died under mysterious circumstances, how someone said that they knew where the paintings were but had never seen them. Like, it's crazy how it kind of captured both the imagination of thieves and nefarious people, as well as reporters, as well as investigators. So it really is the story of how people become obsessed with this case and why there are so many dead ends and how that could be, and how even people who were looked at and then discounted later came back into play, and maybe they did do it, but still nothing has been found, still no case has been solved. So it was a really quick read, it was really interesting, but like I said, I think I went into it with the wrong expectations of having the case solved at some point, or having some sort of concrete lead, or having a revelation as to why the case wasn't solved. And it really isn't that. It's really just about how everyone gets obsessed with this case, including the author, and how it takes a toll like on their lives and on their like mental health and mental acuity, and like how much they desperately want to solve it and how it never gets solved. So it was really interesting. It was really short. I read this one on audio, but I would definitely suggest having the physical copy, because like I just showed you, there's a ton of drawings, there's documents and other things in here, so it makes it interesting to look through as well. But I did enjoy this one. It does also talk a little bit about like the art world, and because the Gardner Museum is such a well-revered museum and by artists and by other curators, by other museum-centric people, it does have a little of that true life art community gossip that I really like. Like, I really like books that talk about artists and how artists are connected and how they've been connected. I like books that talk about like artist communities and what goes on in them. So it had a little bit of that as well. So I enjoyed that about it as well. Overall, I thought this was interesting if you're interested in unexplained cases, if you're interested in unsolved cases, if you're interested in art and art thefts. I would definitely suggest picking it up, but know that it's like unsatisfying. You know, no one's ever solved it. No one knows. The next book that I finished in January was The History of the Tale of Peter Rabbit. This is a very short, abridged work taken mostly from Leslie Linder's A History of the Writing of Beatrix Potter, and then it has text and illustrations from the first publicly printed edition of The Tale of Peter Rabbit, and this is compiled by Frederick Warne. I've read a biography of Beatrix Potter. I love Beatrix Potter. I grew up on The Tale of Peter Rabbit and other Beatrix Potter's books. I really find her character fascinating, her process of writing fascinating, the inception of the Peter Rabbit books fascinating, and this kind of does go along with the letter/diary project that I'm doing in 2026, which I didn't know at the time of reading. This book was technically not on my TBR, although it kind of was. It was a book that I found among my children's books, and because I've been going through the children's books shelf and moving things around, I saw it and I really wanted to read it. This tells the story of the history of Peter Rabbit. So it talks about Beatrix Potter's history a little bit. It tells about how the book was created, why it was created. It tells a lot about the publishing side of it and how she got it published and the back and forth letters between her and the publisher. It definitely displays Beatrix Potter as a very savvy and intelligent woman, which she was, and like a career-minded, career-oriented woman, a woman who would not take no for an answer necessarily, because initially The Tale of Peter Rabbit was rejected several times and she decided to self-publish it. And as soon as she started doing that and put her own money into it, people became interested in it, the publishers became re-interested in it, and it sold like a gazillion copies over the last 100 years or whatever. If you're familiar with The Tale of Peter Rabbit, this is definitely a fun one to read. It's very, very short. It's under 100 pages. It tells some interesting history. I do think at the very end, the author or editor took a little liberties onto where the story was going. Like maybe he didn't really have an end for this particular abridged history, and so he just kind of added some weird stuff at the end. But other than that, I think it's like a really fascinating read, and Beatrix Potter was a really fascinating person, and her life was really interesting, and her writing process was really interesting as well. So always good to read a little more history of Beatrix Potter and The Tale of Peter Rabbit. The next book that I finished in January was Detective Auntie by Usman Jalaluddin. This is a cozy mystery set mostly in Toronto area. It is about a older woman. She's like in her 50s or 60s. Her daughter is grown and has her own daughter. A few years ago, our main character, Cosser's husband, passed away. So they had moved out of the city into a more rural area where Cosser now has a best friend, but they left basically everything behind. Her daughter stayed behind, cut all ties with her friends and stuff, and throughout the book we find out like why that was. But Cosser's husband did keep in contact with those people, even though Cosser hasn't been around the city anytime recently. Like people still know of her, and her daughter owns a little shop in a kind of strip mall of various different people, but it's not like a strip mall. It's like where the stores are connected, so it's kind of almost more like a dirt mall, like where the stores are inside and you go into a place and then all the stores are connected. So kind of like a mall, I guess, is what it is. And one day Cosser gets a phone call from her daughter, who she's had a fairly strained relationship with for the last few years before her husband died, saying that her daughter was being held by the police and could she please come right away and help her daughter. So Cosser decides, despite having this kind of strained relationship with her daughter, that her daughter needs her, and she packs up and she goes right away to Toronto, thinking that she'll only be there for a little while. But of course, Cosser is known for being a detective, for helping her best friend back in the place where she lives, solve some mysteries, for always having been astute and observational. And Cosser decides that she really needs to help her daughter, not in the way her daughter thought she was going to help, by like watching her granddaughter, but by solving the mystery of what happened and why her daughter was held by the police. It's not a spoiler to say that someone in her daughter's life was murdered, and her daughter is being held under suspicion of this murder. So Cosser, against her better judgment, against her desire to want to stay out of the city, decides that she needs to stay longer, and she starts investigating this, and that leads her to rekindle relationships with people that she thought she had cut ties with, thought wouldn't like her, confront her relationship with her daughter, confront her relationship with her son-in-law, and kind of really figure out why she became so much of a recluse and why she extricated herself from the community that she had when she was living in the city. So I thought this was really good. It was really fun. Definitely for fans of Vera Wong. Definitely for fans for like the Thursday Murder Club. I thought it was a super fun, cozy mystery. I loved that Cosser is Muslim and that there was a lot of talk about the community, a lot of talk about tradition, a lot of talk about the food. You know, that definitely reminded me of Vera Wong, that there's a lot of discussion of food and culture, and that Cosser sometimes uses those things to gain knowledge from different people. I like that there was definitely a strong retail element to this, so a strong service industry element with her daughter's job and with the deaths taking place at this workplace. And overall, I just thought it was really good. It was really fun. It was really engaging. I definitely can't wait to read the second book in this series. I've tried Uzma's writing one other time. I did a chapter of Aisha at Last, which was like a contemporary women's book. And then it had like a strong romance element, and I really didn't like it. Like I said, I only read like a chapter, and I think just the subject matter wasn't for me, whereas this was much more intriguing. The main characters were much more intriguing. Chaucer reconnects with a friend of her husband's that maybe they've always found each other quite attractive, so there's that little element, and just Chaucer finding herself again and coming into her own as an older woman despite all the hardships she's gone through and despite having like sequestered herself away for various reasons. Really liked it. Found family, fun group, interesting ending. Didn't guess the mystery, but it was like Vera Wong, not really about the mystery. It was really more about the found family, about the different elements, about the different characters. I really had a good time with this one. The next book that I finished in January was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. This is very different than what I thought it was going to be as well, because this is a young adult, or even, I guess it's a young adult. Our main character, Melody, is like 14 or 15, so young adult / like high middle grade, I guess. And I thought it was going to be like a very linear story all about her when I first started reading it, but it's not. It's really more about her parents and her connection to her parents, the way her parents met. It's about her grandparents who mostly helped raise her because her mom was a teen mom and decided to go off to college when Melody was very young and finish her degree and finish her education and move on and do other things. It's less about Melody than it is about all the people in her life who created her who she was. This book opens with Melody at a quinceanera, a coming out party, a cotillion, which is tradition in her family, but which her mom had to skip because at the time that she would have been having her quinceanera, she was pregnant with Melody. So it talks all about how that affected her mother and the relationship between her mother and her parents who helped raise Melody, who mostly raised Melody, the relationship that they all formed with Melody's dad, and the relationship of Melody's dad and Melody's mom. And I really like this. It's told in pretty short chapters that move backwards and forwards in time, and you are not told who the narrator of the chapter is, so you have to figure it out through context. So you have to start reading the chapter, and there's a lot of hints. It's definitely an easy read in that respect, and it's definitely made easy for younger readers, but there's a lot of hard topics. Obviously, teen pregnancy, parental strife, parental and familial relationships, strained relationships, dropping out of school, working, all of that kind of stuff, as well as like sexual maturity before you're ready is like a common theme in general with both Melody and her mom's stories. And then this was written right around the time of 9/11, so there's talk about terrorism and death from terrorism, as well as just death of family members and parents. So it was written in 2019, way after 9/11, but it is a historical fiction taking place about 20 years earlier. So I did really enjoy this one. I do think the ending was maybe a little rushed or a little confusing, and I think that was partly because the author was doling you out information about this family, knowing the outcome of the family, but you didn't know it. So at the end, she wrapped it all up like quite quickly, and I think I could have used like one more chapter or another part where it like described some of the concepts a little bit more in depth, because some of the concepts are so described in depth, and then at the end it felt rushed. This takes place in Brooklyn. It's by a queer author, so I thought it was really fantastic. I read this for the TBR spin, so you can see more of my thoughts in that video coming soon. We interrupt our regularly scheduled program to say that yes, this this wrap up got way too long. I was right when I talked about it in the beginning of this video that I probably need to find another way of doing these. But for now, we're going to split this wrap up in two. So you've just seen the first part of my January vlog style monthly reading wrap up. Come back in a day or two and see part 2 where I talk about all the rest of the books that I read in January. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here. Let me know what you thought of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!